Let's take a look at it.
You know, I'll start off by saying this. If you just want to build some cool-looking medieval structures like a hut, a home, or even an entire village,
I did that.
PAX Day's got you covered. As outlined by recent videos showcasing various community builds, you can make some cool-looking stuff. Like, genuinely, these are fantastic-looking medieval buildings. I will not deny that. Although, do keep in mind that building anything beyond a tiny wood dwelling does require cooperation with a large number of people.
Yeah, it
people
does.
farming the vast
Which,
amounts
by the way, is the way it should work. I like that.
of resources needed and people proficient in the various processing skills required to refine those resources into the building components before you can make the buildings. You can build a tiny little home yourself, but you won't be building a massive village or castles like these by yourself. That requires a lot of people all working together. As the developer outlined in their pre-release
It takes a village to make a village. I think that's kind of fair.
statement, PAX Day is not a single-player game.
Yes.
It's also, according to that same post, not a theme park MMO, not a medieval simulator, not a survival game, and not a fast-paced game. After spending most of yesterday playing PAX Day, in addition to time spent in earlier alpha tests, I will add one more thing to the list, something else that PAX Day isn't, and that's ready. It's just not quite ready, and in its current state, I don't think it's particularly very good either. It does do a few things well. Players can come together and build very cool stuff, as you've seen. And visually, PAX Day looks phenomenal. I mean, like, jaw-dropping at times how good-looking this game can be. In particular, the lighting and environmental effects. On many occasions, I would be like walking through the woods in a field or looking out at some vista and think to myself, man, this looks amazing. But everything else...
And he's right about that. I completely agree with him, but here's the problem, is that, you know, another game that has that? New World. New World has some of the most amazing views and, like, I don't know, like, environments, like, ever. It was so cool. Like, I love it. So it's like, okay, well, if New World has this, you know, and it's in that situation, does that really make the game? No, it doesn't. And I would say the combat in New World is, like, miles above PAX Day.
About the game is simply not very good at the moment. And that at the moment part is important because, yes, this is an early access title. They didn't release PAX Day saying it was a finished product, very much the opposite. But as with anything else, the quality and completeness of early access games can vary. For example, two of my favorite games so far this year have been early access, both Enshrouded and No Rest for the Wicked. Even though those games aren't complete with more content and features still planned to come, both of them still also felt fully realized, generally polished, and most importantly, they were fun to play.
Let's be honest here. Enshrouded and No Rest for the Wicked are, like, infinitely more polished and well done than PAX Day. It's not even close.
Over 50 hours into the early access launches of both of these games. But PAX Day lacks any of that currently. It doesn't feel fully realized. It doesn't seem even close to polished, and it hasn't been very fun to play, unfortunately enough. Now, fun is subjective. I have got no doubt that people are having a good time working together with 5, 10, 20 plus other people and building some awesome looking medieval villages.
I would have played it more. The reason why I'm not playing it right now is because of the lag. There was just so much lag, I wasn't able to play the game. And I was also doing Elden Ring.
There are some 8,000 to 10,000 concurrent players online, and I'm sure many of them are enjoying themselves. But for me, the game still needs quite a bit of work before I'll consider playing it again. And I know I'm not alone. As of now, Steam reviews sit at a mixed with a rating of 46%. Now,
you also have to keep in mind that, like, some of those reviews are protest reviews because they don't like the monetization of the game. So, like, that, all of these reviews are not because it's the same as, like, people are saying, like, oh, Elden Ring was getting bad reviews because it was so hard. Like, if you read the reviews, yes, that's some of the reviews, but I would say another probably equal amount of the reviews are just performance-based. So, yeah. Is the game pay to win? The game, I think you can get an extra plot of land if you pay money or something like that, but it's not hard pay to win. There's just a couple of extra advantages that you can purchase. But would I say that it's pay to win, like, in, like, a functional way? No, it's not. Pay to win is pay to win. Sure, right? But, like, do you want to paint with a broad brush to a degree that it removes all nuance from the conversation, or do you want to understand what's going on. You can decide, right? That's up to you. But at the end of the day, every Steam review is valid, okay? Every Steam review, unless it's about something that doesn't have to do with the game, right? It's like, hey, I got McDonald's today, I'm going to downvote this game. That's kind of an invalid review. But other than that, it is a valid review.
Sure, some of those negative reviews were due to the launch day server and performance issues. There was rubber banding. There was the fact that you couldn't build anything for most of yesterday. Like placing down stuff would consume the resources, but then the wall station or whatever it was you tried to place wouldn't appear. Or sometimes you would place down a structure and later that structure would vanish. But the technical stuff aside, much of which has already been addressed, there are more important things that they need to take care of. Now, I would classify this game as extremely early access. Like, we need to put early access games into different tiers. I think their estimated 1 year early access period until 1.0 release seems a little ambitious. Like PAX Day.
I don't know if it's going to be ready in a year, because so this is the way that I look at it, right? So if I look at Asmongold, PAX Day. When was the first time I played this game? For the first time. So this was 7 months ago. If I look at the way the game has evolved... This is not sponsored. They did... No, I don't know if that's possible, but if it is, go ahead and do it. Is this the first one that I did?
Okay, that looks good.
Yeah, this is the first one. So
yeah, if you want to come with me, we're going to cut down some of the trees. Come over to here.
This is basically the same game as this. Like, they polished a little bit of this. It's pretty much the same. The game's 90% the same? Yes.
It feels very far from finish. It's not something that I would currently recommend spending full price on, let alone the monthly subscription that the game intends to launch with. So what does need work? Well, pretty much everything else outside of the visuals and the building. Consider this the constructive feedback portion of the video. For me, the biggest standout disappointment absolutely is the combat. It's awful. I don't know how else to put it. I don't really want to...
Yes, the combat is terrible. It is unequivocally terrible, and if the game releases with this combat, it will die. Period. Like, that's it.
Sugarcoat it, just does not feel good. Some of the worst MMO combat I've ever experienced. Zero weight or impact feel to any part of the combat loop. Were it not for the health bars floating over enemies' heads, I couldn't ever tell you if I hit anything. Like, I have no clue, because it constantly feels like you're swinging at the air even when attacks do connect. I've heard some people say that the game is using the baked-in UE5 tech demo combat. I don't know if that's the case. They might be
I mean, if they're using tech demo combat, then that's fine, but you can't expect people to, like, say, oh, well, they're going to make the combat better in the future. Well, when is that future going to happen? When does that come? So if the combat doesn't look good right now, then it's not good right now. That's all there is to it.
Exaggerating, but I would say whatever implementation of combat feedback that they have got right now, it needs a lot of work. It just is very floaty. It feels weightless, and it's not...
And by the way, the developer said the combat is a placeholder. But I think that it's also fair for people to be worried whenever that placeholder has been in place for 7 months and we haven't seen any evolution of it that's been displayed at all. And if you contrast this with, for example, Ashes of Creation, where Ashes of Creation has given us very small slices of combat, of what to expect in the game, they haven't done any of that. So, like, you're basically asking people to write a blank check that, like, oh, yeah, the combat is going to come out and it's going to be really good. Why do we think that's going to happen? I hope that's what's going to happen. I do. But, like, you can't expect people to take that to the bank.
Engaging at all. For me, improving the combat should be their #1 priority. I think that alone would make playing the game far more enjoyable. If fighting things was engaging, I would spend more time playing PAX Day, just going around clearing camps and hunting wildlife. Good feeling combat carries a lot of value to me, but simply right now, combat in PAX Day, it's not good at all. It's like
it's terrible.
Bottom of the barrel. Unfortunately,
if they release the game with that combat, it will kill the game. Period.
and lack of good feel extends to another big portion of the game. As mentioned earlier, building stuff is pretty much the main thing there is to do right now in PAX Day, and half of that equation is gathering the materials needed for building. Similar to combat, gathering also feels pretty bad, mainly because it feels like nothing at all. Between the sounds, animations, and UI feedback or lack thereof.
Again, New World did this way better. New World's gathering and crafting system was amazing.
Resources isn't engaging either. Chopping down a tree, picking up herbs, mining rocks,
the forest
and ore,
was so good. Yeah, how you have to go around the trees.
Feedback.
Yeah.
As with the combat, it's as if you're swinging and missing even when you hit. Even when you hit a tree to chop it down, doesn't feel like it happened. The feedback isn't there. Some things have no animations at all, like harvesting animal parts, for example. While many of those that do have animations still lack that satisfying feel. And while
and here's the issue too, right? Is like whenever you put a game out like this and you say like, yeah, this is what the game's going to be like. And like, whenever a game comes out to early access, if a game comes out and it's too early access, people will assume that it's not going to get better. I bet there's a lot of games that looked like this whenever they first started. But the problem is that whenever you put this out to the public, people are going to think that it's one specific thing.
Back might sound silly to some. There are plenty of games that have done good feeling gathering and harvesting. Many survival games and MMOs have nailed this in the past. I would look at them for inspiration. Off the top of my head, I would say that the gathering and crafting in both Lost Ark and New World were extremely well done. And those are games...
I think that Lost Ark's crafting system was literal dog shit. I think that it was terrible. It was boring and one-dimensional. New World, I completely agree with, though.
That are full of other issues, but chopping down trees and harvesting ore felt good and impactful in both. That part of the gameplay experience was satisfying. Gathering in PAX Day, just like its combat, it does not feel good. Another big thing I want to point out right now that I do think will push a lot of players away is
You're talking about gathering? Yeah, I know the gathering. The only cool thing about Lost Ark's gathering is that if you have two people cutting down a tree, they can go on opposite sides of the tree and make a two-man saw. That's the only cool thing about the gathering there. Everything else is garbage.
Mind of the game, progressing past the very basic early tiers of items requires tons and tons of grinding. Now, much of this is clearly fueled by the developer's desire to require working together as a group. And one way to reinforce that requirement is that making progressing practically impossible for solo players. They have achieved this goal in two main ways. Number one, the sheer quantity of items required for progression. And number two...
And this, by the way, this part of the game, it doesn't bother me. I think this is totally fine. As long as there are no server wipes, that's fine.
Proficiency skill levels that no single person could achieve themselves in a reasonable amount of time. You are required various parts of various professions, and leveling up those professions takes a heck of a lot of time, such that you cannot continue until you get with someone else who has progressed in another profession. And so both of these things will prevent solo, and I would say even small groups of players, from what we can tell, from progressing very far in the game. But even if you are playing in a big group, if you've got like 30 plus people that you're playing PAX Day with, you still have a lot of work ahead of you. The game has a massive number of items that you'll need to collect. There are at least hundreds, if not potentially thousands.
This needs to be changed, and I think that a lot of survival games need to stop doing this chest system where like you have to take the items out of the chests in order to craft with them. I feel like this is a vestigial system and it just makes the game feel worse. In Shrouded, you unlock it. In POW World, it's the default. Those games just have a better system. There's nothing else. It's just a time waster. It's just fucking annoying. That's it. You said in the past it's critical for games to accommodate the solo player. What the fuck? You're right. And I think that you should be able to accommodate. This game does accommodate the solo player, but the game is designed to be played with multiple people. Like, for example, Narc played this game solo, and he was able to have a good solo experience. So classic WoW accommodates the solo player, but if you want to get epic raid gear, you have to do raids. So both things can be true. It seems like it doesn't, like at all. Wait, I'm confused by what people are disagreeing with. I'm solo right now, had no issues. Yeah, exactly. And so, like, obviously, in order to, like, fully finish out a crafting tool, they're saying Narc is wrong. Well, he played the game. That was his experience in the game. I don't know what you want me to say. It's a slippery slope of what defines a solo player experience. I think that, like, giving a solo player a great experience in a game does not mean watering down the multiplayer experience so the solo player can achieve the same thing. That's not the same thing as giving a solo player a good experience.
Of different resource and item types. There's a lot to manage, even for people who are used to playing various survival games, which PAX Day is not, by the way. That was in the list of things PAX Day is not. PAX Day does have the typical resource types. You'll find various sorts of ores, stones and clays, plants, herbs, fruits, woods, fibers, thatches, animal parts, over 100 different alchemy items. The list goes on. And many, if not most of those, also have several tiers. So for example, there are 3 tiers of iron ore that we found in the last test, and that goes for other resources as well. So there are many different resources and item types further multiplied into their different tiers that you'll be using for crafting your items, weapons, tools, and especially for building, which you will then also need huge quantities of certain items if you want to build anything other than a basic hut. Which leads me to another big issue right now for PAX Day. That is the crafting and storage. So for starters, there is no craft from storage. This is a clear feature.
Yes, he's completely right. There should be craft from storage. There is no excuse not to have it. Every game that doesn't have it is worse because of that. That's it.
Inclusion that would immediately improve the game, especially when you understand just how many chests you're likely going to need if you're playing. So for example, in the last test just a few weeks ago, Liam spent his time just trying to be a cook. Like, that is all he focused on for a majority of the first few days. And after about 4 days of playing with just him working on cooking and doing some gathering in between the processing portion of it, they had over 50 storage chests just for cooking related items. 50. And you can imagine how much of a nightmare it is to manually sort through 50 storage chests looking for.
Here's why that's a problem, and here's why it's happening. It's because the stack sizes are too low. Blizzard used to have this problem with WoW, and then they changed it to like stacks go up to 200. Because you wouldn't need all of these boxes if this stacked up to 999. So just make it stack higher, and then the box problem goes away. So the problem isn't the amount of resources, it's the way the resources are stored.
For items to do your cooking, and that was just for cooking. The game also has professions for alchemy, jewelry making, carpentry, armor and blacksmithing, leatherworking, fletching, weaponsmithing, and tailoring, and each of those professions have their own sets of materials, resources, and components that you will need storing, manual sorting, and retrieval of. After just 4 days in the last test, Liam's group had over 150 storage chests. This was a group of 10 to 15 players online.
So if you had 150 storage chests and you were stacking things for 5, and then 5 would go into 1,000 effectively 200 times. So you would only need maybe 5 chests, 10 chests. The problem is the stack size, not the chests. It's the stack size.
At any given time, and apparently you're going to need to play in groups much larger than that, which would presumably mean you need many more than 150 storage chests. It's a lot to manage, especially without crafting from storage. I think it would go a long way if they added crafting from storage.
Both things should be changed.
On a similar note, those.
And I also think that it's a good thing that solo players can't build big castles. I think that's. I think that is a. It's logically good in my opinion. Because like the idea that like it takes a big group of people to like raise something really cool, and like you can see it and be like, wow, that was like a group achievement. That makes more sense, yeah. They can't ever. Well, I'm sure a solo player will be able to do it, but it will just take them way longer.
Crafting proficiency levels will be a big gate for solo and smaller groups of players. As you level your proficiency, you do this by engaging in the crafting activity. So working at the bench, whether you are doing alchemy, jewelry making, carpentry, actually doing those things levels you up, makes you better, makes it easier, and you less likely to fail crafting the harder recipes of that type. But as you move into the later tiers, the higher end forms of progression for these different professions, they're going to require you to get high-end materials crafted by players with proficiencies in the other professions. So for example, if you are a cook, eventually you're going to need to make a higher end oven, but you won't be able to do that on your own because you're going to need a smith to craft a higher tier version of ore, and you're going to need a tailor to make another component that goes as part of that. If either player in the group of people that you're playing with is behind in their progression, you are going to get straight up bottlenecked until they level up, which is exactly what happened to us in the last test. This is going to...
Am I a crazy masochist for thinking that's a good thing? Because like I find that like I want to talk about Season of Discovery for a second, like Classic WoW Season of Discovery, where like I think that Classic WoW Season of Discovery kind of fell off because Blizzard didn't understand that player interdependency is one of the big reasons why the game had such a strong social fabric. And whenever you remove player interdependency, and I understand that player interdependency is extremely inconvenient. I understand that. But I think that that inconvenience serves a greater goal, and it creates a better textured experience. It's the same as like Dragon's Dogma 2 not having fast travel. Like, there are a lot of things that games have that might feel bad, but I think if they're designed in the right way, they enhance the experience.
Affect obviously the solo players, but even again those small groups of players, I think 5, 10 to 15 people, unless you are all actively playing at the same pace and at the same level, you're going to get bottlenecked by other players who aren't up to the levels they need to be to make the thing that you need in order for you to progress.
I think that's
so yes,
okay.
There is a lot to grind, and again, this is clearly done to reinforce the requirement of
because
playing.
This will go away, by the way. It'll go away after like the first 2 or 3 weeks of the game, because at that point everybody that can make this stuff will have already maxed it out.
In groups and working with other people. Like the devs say, this is not a solo game. The group focus, however, extends beyond the resource crafting, gathering, and farming and grinding. Combat as well, outside of those early tiers of wildlife, will require multiple players. This is especially true once you leave the starting areas. You pretty much need to be in a group if you're going to do any combat. Enemies in these zones...
Can I explain that a bit more? Yeah, basically what happens in, like, for example, New World is that at the beginning, nobody could craft like orichalcum or ironwood, right? Because it just came out. But like now, if you want to get ironwood, it's very easy to get it. Like you just buy it on the auction house. So like basically like late game resources are extremely expensive at the very beginning. But then as more players reach that late game, it drives the price of those resources down because you have more people that are able to access them at a more regular rate. That's the reason why. And this will happen over time naturally. So if you start playing this game a month into release, all of these problems will not exist.
Will be way stronger than the gear you can craft at that time makes you. So until you actually go in and deal with those enemies and then craft the resources around them that they're basically protecting, you're not going to be able to do this in a small group, or definitely not as a solo. In fact, in these areas, you will regularly see groups of like 10 people wailing away at a single boar. That's not an exaggeration. That's just what it's like. And I want to make clear too, I think it's perfectly fine to have a grind-focused game. I think it's perfectly fine to have a game that requires grouping and working with other players. If anything, that's welcome. Most MMOs nowadays, they cater to solo play. It's a nice fresh breath of air to get something a little different. I also think it's perfectly fine to make a slower paced game as well with more time.
The problem in this game is the combat. It's some of the like the storage systems, it's the guild systems, and the end game. That's the problem in this game. That's the big issue. Number 1 is combat, number 2 is combat, and I would say even number 3 is combat.
Investment required for progression, but both of those things will likely limit the game's potential audience. But
so you either make good combat or just take combat completely out of the game.
Okay, these aren't bad ideas. It's really just the implementation, and more so it's just not finished. It's not polished enough, and the motivation there to actually go through that grind and to go through the effort of working with people and joining those large groups. Besides building, there's really not much else to this game. And really that's what I think the bigger issue is. That's about all PAX Day is at the moment. A big grind for resources and a requirement to play with huge groups to meaningfully progress. Combat is extremely rough. This is a massive negative for me. Even the gathering doesn't feel good, which certainly doesn't help. So yes, outside of building things, I guess PvP combat with bad combat, there's not much else for you to do in this game. Not even to mention...
this is an early access game, like in every sense of the word.
Game's monetization. For what I would consider right now a pretty rough product, they are charging $39 for basic access, with there also being $60 and $100 tiers that grant additional character slots, cosmetics, and plots of land, which some people are considering and calling pay to win. These land plots provide a pretty big advantage over control of rare resources because they will spawn at set locations. So with extra plots, you can basically spread your ability to get these resources, your access to it and to storing it, and to access to things like dungeons. Plus, once the game is finished, they have also confirmed that it will require a monthly subscription to play. I think in theory, having a monthly sub for an MMO is fine.
I think that asking people to pay this much money for a game that's in this state is going to rub a lot of people the wrong way, and it makes sense that so many people are frustrated.
Again say, as of right now, it's not quite there. It needs to improve quite a lot before I would even consider paying a subscription. And I want to reiterate as well, I think the premise of this game is good. I think right now, visually, it is gorgeous. Love the way it looks. Just like getting screenshots and walking around the forest of this game, that's pretty cool. And I also think the structures that players can build are rather impressive.
Yeah,
frankly.
they're awesome.
Like, this is a really well done, build yourself a medieval town game. But that's
Absolutely.
all it is right now. If you just want to make cool medieval castles with a bunch of your friends in a pretty looking world, PAX Day does give you that. But outside of that, it's just pretty bare bones and frankly underbaked. Like I said, it feels like an extremely early access game.
Right,
but I hope they make it better. The pitch for the final version of what they want PAX Day to be, it sounds great. There's just quite a ways to go from what we've seen thus far. I would be surprised, honestly, if the game actually launches into its 1.0 version 12 months from now. It appears like they're going to need a little more time, or if it does, I would be surprised if it gets to a point where...
I mean, this 7 months ago, 8 months ago, the beta came out. The first one that we saw, the game has made almost no progress since then. Like, I feel like it's basically the same game that we played back then.
Consider satisfying
they changed
for a
the UI a little
release
bit
for paying a subscription fee. There's a lot of promise here with PAX Day. I wanted to make
just look
people
at the
aware
VOD.
that the
Just
current
watch my
iteration
VOD.
I just don't think is quite it. Doesn't mean that people won't enjoy it. I have enjoyed games that I've just done building in. I think a lot of people would consider EverQuest Next Landmark probably a bad game. It's shut down after all, but I remember having fun with it, although that was a little different because coincidentally enough, EverQuest Next Landmark was a building game where you could build massive structures as a single person, whereas again this does have that group focus, and we'll just see how that pans out in terms of audience size, in terms of success. As of right now, the early access launch has not been very successful, but I wish the developers well, and I hope they can turn PAX Day around and it ends up with a 1.0 release that does feel worth a subscription cost. We'll see. Thanks, that's it for today.
By the way, they're never going to be able to do a subscription cost. I got to rethink that.
Always appreciate you watching. I'll see you guys next time. Take it easy.
He's right. He's right. I'll link you guys the video. Give it a like. I'll just play Enshrouded if I want to build, honestly. Yeah, but building with a community is really fun. Or at least, like, I think it's fun. There's the video right there. It's doomed no matter what. You think it's doomed? I don't know if it's doomed. But, like, I'd never even pay for this game. Yeah, I mean, I think that, like, I just think that asking a subscription for a game is, like, too much to do now. Especially now with, like, the negative connotation of how subscriptions work and, like, people not liking subscriptions, you know, to, like, different stuff. Like, I'm gonna be honest, like, it's hard, man. It's fucking hard. So, yeah, Minecraft is cooler. Yeah, I don't really see subscription models BIS. Yeah, but, like, why would I want a subscription model whenever the game already offers ways for me to pay more money to get advantages? Because, like, from my perspective, being able to get a subscription model for the game means that I shouldn't have to deal with any of that. That's my perspective, at least.